Hey, before we dive in, take a moment. Watch this video and pay attention, really pay attention to what you're hearing, because what you're about to learn will change how you see the world around you, the world beneath your feet. Subscribe if you're genuinely curious about how life works at scales we usually ignore, at scales too small for us to see clearly. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what made you click on this particular video. It's always interesting and fascinating to see who's interested in the lives of creatures smaller than a grain of salt. Now settle in, maybe grab some water, maybe find somewhere quiet where you can think, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background sound, because we're about to shrink down, way down into one of the most fascinating societies on Earth. Not a human civilization with precedents and laws, not a kingdom with a monarchy, a colony of ants, a superorganism. And what we're going to discover will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to be alive, to be organized, to be a single unified thing, to be a self. We're going to explore the idea that colonies aren't just groups of creatures working together in a loose collective. We're going to ask whether a colony might be something far more fundamental, something that you've never considered before, something that changes how you understand organization, intelligence, purpose, and the very nature of life itself. Let's go. If you've ever watched an ant, really watched one for more than a few seconds, you see something that looks simple on the surface. A tiny creature, 6 legs, an exoskeleton the size of a grain of rice, moving without apparent thought or direction or purpose. It picks things up, it drops things, it wanders in what seems like random patterns across the ground, sometimes for minutes at a time. It runs into other ants head-on. Sometimes it turns back, sometimes it continues forward anyway, pushing past them. It stops suddenly for no reason you can identify. It starts again. It changes direction for no apparent reason, for no cue you can detect. There's something almost comedic about watching a single ant work if you don't know what you're looking at, if you've never considered the larger context. It seems inefficient, chaotic, pointless, meaningless. Like the ant has no idea what it's doing and is just fumbling through existence hoping to stumble onto something useful by accident. Like it's just running on automatic pilot, executing programs it doesn't understand. And maybe that's true from the ant's individual perspective. Maybe the ant is genuinely confused, moving on instinct and chemical signals that it doesn't understand, responding to pheromones without comprehending what they mean or where they're coming from. It's receiving instructions it can't read. But here's where most people stop looking. Here's where the illusion sets in and prevents us from seeing what's really happening. They see the confusion in individual ant behavior and assume the whole system must be confused. They see the randomness and think the colony is fundamentally chaotic and disorganized. They watch thousands of ants bumbling around and conclude that nothing meaningful is being accomplished, that it's all just random motion. That chaos is the natural order of things in ant colonies. That ants are just getting lucky. But this is the illusion that blinds us. This is where we get it fundamentally wrong. When we focus exclusively on individual ants, when we zoom in too close and lose the bigger picture, when we refuse to step back and look at the whole, we miss something extraordinary, something remarkable. We miss the fact that these confused, wandering, apparently purposeless creatures are actually building cities. Complex underground structures of incredible architectural sophistication and engineering. They're farming. They're cultivating fungus gardens inside their nests, managing the crop carefully, harvesting it, feeding themselves and their colony through agriculture that rivals human farming. They're hunting in coordinated squads that surround prey and attack with tactical strategy. Multiple ants working together to overcome enemies much larger than themselves. They're solving problems that would require teams of human engineers with degrees and computer models to figure out. How do you ventilate an underground structure without electricity or fans or any moving parts? How do you regulate temperature in the darkness without thermostats? How do you allocate resources efficiently across thousands of individuals without a supply chain department? They're doing all of this without anyone in charge, without a queen barking orders or making decisions, without a plan written down anywhere, no blueprint, no architectural drawings, without meetings or management committees or hierarchy in any traditional sense, no chain of command, no one telling anyone else what to do. So the question becomes unavoidable and necessary. If individual ants seem so lost and confused, how is the colony so organized? Where is the intelligence coming from if no single ant seems to possess it? How does chaos at the individual level produce order, perfect coordinated order, at the collective level? How does confusion create clarity? How does randomness create strategy? These are not simple questions with easy answers. These are questions that went unanswered for centuries. Scientists watched ants for generations and generations and only saw confusion. They saw many individuals acting randomly and assumed the individuals must somehow be in control. That intelligence must exist somewhere in individual brains. They never considered that perhaps, just perhaps, the individuals were irrelevant, that the individual ant's consciousness, or lack thereof, didn't matter, that the real action, the real thought, the real intelligence was happening somewhere else entirely, in a place that had no physical location, in a process rather than in a being, a pattern that emerged from many small things rather than direction from one large thing. And once you start asking these questions, once you start looking at ants not as independent individuals, but as parts of something much larger than themselves, everything changes. The chaos transforms into patterns. The randomness becomes strategy. The inefficient wandering of a single ant suddenly makes perfect sense, because you realize that single ant was never meant to make sense alone. It was never designed to make sense by itself. It was never equipped to be understandable in isolation. It was designed to make sense as part of something bigger, much bigger, a superorganism, a collective being. Let's zoom out. Imagine you're a camera rising above a single ant nest, pulling back and back and back, gaining altitude and perspective. From close up, from the ground level, everything is chaotic and confusing. But as you zoom out, something shifts, something changes. The picture becomes clearer. Take a step back from the individual ant and expand your view dramatically. At first, what you see doesn't seem to change much. You see more ants, maybe hundreds moving around, maybe thousands, tens of thousands even. They're still moving in ways that seem chaotic and random and purposeless. They're still bumbling into each other occasionally, still seemingly aimless and confused as individuals. But something starts to become visible, something crucial and fundamental, if you watch long enough and pay very careful, dedicated attention. Patterns begin to emerge that weren't visible at the smaller scale, at the level of individual ants. Trails form across the ground, visible trails that you can actually see. These trails are physical, made of pheromones laid down and reinforced by individual ants, but they function at the collective level. Ants seem to be moving towards something, all converging, all aligned. They're clustering around food sources that appeared out of nowhere from their individual perspective. They're moving in directions that, if you somehow asked any individual ant why it was going that specific direction, the ant probably couldn't tell you. The ant has no map. The ant has no communication device. The ant has no training. But somehow, collectively, the ants are moving with a purpose that seems almost intentional. And here's the thing that really breaks the illusion of complete randomness and chaos. and proves there's something deeper happening. You start to notice that when one ant finds something valuable, something nutritious, something worth bringing home, something worth expending precious energy to transport, other ants find it too, often within minutes. Not because they can see it from far away. Ants don't have great vision. They're basically blind compared to humans. Not because they have radios or phones to communicate the location to each other across distances. Not because they can read written directions or look at a map or read instructions. But because there's an invisible connection between them. A chemical message. A pheromone trail that once laid down by that first forager ant acts like a map. Acts like a message saying, "Follow me, food is this way." And the more ants follow that trail, the stronger it becomes, because they add their own pheromones to it, reinforcing it and amplifying the signal. The stronger the trail becomes, the more ants are attracted to it. More ants follow it and reinforce it further with their own chemicals. It's a feedback loop, a positive reinforcement spiral, a spiral of increasing organization that creates itself spontaneously without any management, without any direction, without any central control. This is not centralized planning. This is not hierarchical design. No ant called a meeting and decided this system should exist. No ant architect sat down and designed it on paper. No ant is enforcing it with authority or punishment. No foreman is whipping workers into line. But it works. It works remarkably well, remarkably efficiently. It works better, in fact, than centralized planning would work, because it's responsive to the environment. It's flexible. It adapts automatically. If the food source runs out, if the colony depletes all the available food at the end of the trail, the ants stop finding anything at the end of the trail. They stop discovering resources. They stop reinforcing it. The trail weakens over time as the pheromone evaporates. Eventually it's abandoned completely, and ants move on to other trails, other opportunities. If a new food source appears elsewhere, if a forager ant finds something fresh and nutritious, a new trail forms almost immediately to that new location. The system adapts instantly to new circumstances. If an old route becomes dangerous, if ants start getting eaten or killed by predators along that particular path, ants stop using it without needing to call a meeting or vote about it. They simply don't encounter other ants coming back down that trail with food, so they don't reinforce the trail with their pheromones. The system corrects itself automatically. The entire system self-corrects and adapts because each individual ant is responding only to local information, the chemicals it encounters on its antennae, the density of ants around it in the immediate vicinity, the pheromone signature it can detect with its sensors. There's no global perspective in any single brain. No ant has a complete map of the entire territory and all its resources. No ant knows where the colony ends or where danger begins. No ant understands the big picture, but together, all these local perspectives, all these individual responses to immediate stimuli, all these tiny decisions made by individual ants add up to something remarkable and profound, something unexpected. It adds up to something that looks remarkably like global intelligence, global organization, something that behaves as if the colony itself is thinking, as if it's making strategic decisions. But what if thinking isn't the right word? What if intelligence isn't the right word? What if we need a completely different framework, a new way of understanding, to make sense of what's happening here? Because thinking usually happens in a brain. It usually requires a creature with consciousness and intent and personal goals and desires and hopes and dreams. Ants don't seem to have any of that. They don't have hopes or dreams or aspirations. They don't plan for the future or worry about the past. They don't have consciousness as far as we can tell. So, what word do we use for what they're doing? What word describes this emergent behavior? this organization without a leader, this cooperation without agreement. This is the core mystery. This is the fundamental question. This is what we have to solve if we want to understand how an ant colony actually works as a unified system, as a superorganism. Before we can understand how an ant colony functions as a single organism, we need to step back and ask a fundamentally different question. A question that challenges our assumptions. What makes something an organism in the first place? What is an organism, really? What's the definition? Usually, when we think about it, we think of something with a clear boundary, a border, something with a beginning and an end, a creature with a defined body. A human is an organism. A tree is an organism. A dog is an organism. A bacterium is an organism. They have bodies. They have coherence. They have integrity. They're discrete entities. But what exactly is a body? What makes a thing cohere into a single entity rather than remaining a collection of disconnected parts? What's the glue that holds things together? What's the principle that binds things into one? Here's where it gets interesting. Here's where our understanding starts to shift and change. Your body, right now, is not a single organism in the simple sense. This might sound strange, contradictory, but stay with me. Your body is a colony. It functions like a colony in almost every meaningful way we can measure. Every single cell in your body is technically alive, has life. Every cell has its own metabolism. Every cell does work. Every cell consumes energy and produces waste products. But they don't work independently. They can't. They're not independent. They work together in ways that are so coordinated, so integrated, so fundamentally dependent on each other that we call the whole thing you. We call it an organism, an individual. We don't look at you and say you're a collection of 37 trillion independent agents that happen to be occupying the same space. We don't call you a colony of cells. We say you're one thing, one unified whole, one person, one being. And we say that because the cells are so coordinated, so integrated, that they've achieved something higher than individuality. They've transcended it. They've become something new, something that couldn't possibly exist without the integration, something that has no existence outside the system. Your liver doesn't survive outside your body. Take it out and it dies within hours. It can't function. It has no purpose alone. A neuron from your brain doesn't survive without the other neurons. It needs the others. It needs the support, the electrical signals, the chemical exchange, the synaptic connections. The cells are physiologically interdependent. They cannot function independently. They cannot survive alone. They're not designed for independence. But when they work together, when they're integrated into a larger system, they produce something that no individual cell could ever produce, could ever achieve. Intelligence, consciousness, thought, the ability to solve problems, the ability to create art, the ability to understand the world and our place in it, the ability to love and fear and hope. None of these things exist in a single cell. No cell is conscious. No individual cell has awareness. A single neuron is not aware. It doesn't think. But consciousness emerges when enough neurons work together in the right way, in the right patterns. It emerges from the integration. It emerges from the coordination. It emerges from the very fact that individual units have given up independence in order to be part of something larger. That's the secret. Consciousness is what you get when individual units surrender their autonomy. So the question becomes unavoidable and logical. Why do we assume ants are different? Why do we think that individual ants, working together, can't achieve something similar? Why can't a colony have emergent properties that no individual ant possesses? Why can't an ant colony be, in some very real and scientific sense, an organism? Why couldn't it be that what we call intelligence or organization or purpose emerges from the integration of many ants, the way consciousness emerges from many neurons? The word for this idea is superorganism, and it's not a metaphor. It's not poetic language or flowery description or artistic fancy. It's a technical term used by evolutionary biologists and entomologists and scientists to describe systems that exhibit the characteristics of organisms, even though they're made up of multiple discrete individuals, multiple separate ants. It's a real scientific concept grounded in evidence. And it applies to ant colonies with striking and powerful accuracy. The term superorganism was coined by an American entomologist named William Morton Wheeler in 1911. Early 20th century. The beginning of modern ant science. Wheeler was watching ants, really watching them carefully and methodically, spending his entire career studying them in detail, observing colonies for hours and hours and hours, documenting behavior, taking notes, asking questions, and he came to a conclusion that seemed wild at the time, almost impossible to believe, but which we now understand as fundamentally and profoundly correct. Ants don't live as individuals. They don't function as independent creatures. They live as a single, unified entity. The colony is the organism. The colony is the life form. The individual ants are more like cells or organs than like distinct creatures with their own goals. Just like your body is made up of different types of cells doing different jobs, serving different functions, an ant colony is made up of different types of ants, different castes, doing different jobs. Queens that lay eggs and produce chemicals that regulate the entire colony, workers that forage and maintain the nest and care for the young, soldiers that defend against invaders and protect the territory. Each caste has a specific role, a particular job, a function. Each role is essential to colony survival and success. Each role is completely dependent on the others for its success and meaning. No single caste can survive independently. No caste can exist alone. The queen cannot feed herself. She doesn't know how. She has no instinct for it. She cannot defend the nest. She cannot build anything. She cannot navigate. Without the workers, without their constant care and attention, the queen dies. Simple as that. Death from starvation or neglect. But the workers cannot reproduce. They can't lay eggs. Without a queen, without the queen's genetics and her pheromones, the colony has an expiration date. Eventually, the workers age and die. No new ants are born. The colony becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until it ceases to exist entirely. The soldiers cannot forage efficiently. They're specialized for combat, for fighting, not for finding food. Without the workers bringing food to them, everyone starves. Everyone dies. These castes are physiologically interdependent in exactly the same way your cells are interdependent. A red blood cell cannot survive without a neuron. A neuron cannot survive without a liver cell. A muscle cell cannot survive without nerve signals. They all depend on each other for survival. And when these different castes work together, when they're integrated into a unified colony system, they achieve something remarkable. Something that seems almost impossible when you first learn about it. They build structures of incredible complexity and sophistication. Tunnels, chambers, ventilation systems that regulate airflow, temperature control systems. They solve problems collectively that no individual ant could solve alone. Complex engineering problems, resource allocation problems, defense problems, collective decision-making. They make decisions that benefit the whole colony, often at a tremendous cost to the individual. An ant will sacrifice itself for the colony without hesitation, without complaint. It will work without rest, with only brief pauses for feeding. It will fight to the death to protect nestmates it has never directly encountered. Nestmates it has no genetic obligation to protect. This behavior only makes sense if the ant is part of something larger than itself. Only makes sense if the colony really is, in some profound and scientific and measurable way, a single organism with its own survival imperatives. The integrating system that holds the superorganism together is not a nervous system like yours. It's not blood pumping through veins. It's not neurons firing and creating conscious thoughts. It's chemistry, pheromones, invisible chemical signals passed between individuals that create a shared reality, a shared understanding of what needs to be done and when. The colony experiences the world through the antennae of thousands of workers. It senses its environment through their sensory organs. It processes that sensory information through a distributed network of tiny brains. And it produces a coordinated response that we can observe and study and analyze and marvel at in wonder. The superorganism is not metaphorical. It's not just a poetic or fanciful way of speaking about ants. It's real. It's documented. It's measurable. It's observable. It's just different from the organisms we're most familiar with. Different structure, different integrating system, different way of being alive, but same fundamental organization, same emergent properties. And here's the thing that really changes how you understand ant colonies completely and fundamentally. A single ant cannot survive alone, not for any significant length of time, not for weeks, not even for days, not really, not in any meaningful way. The queen without workers dies. She can't feed herself. She doesn't know how. She has no instincts for foraging or finding food. Without workers bringing her food constantly, without them caring for her, she starves. Death by starvation. Simple and absolute. Workers without a queen die too, but for a different reason. They die because they have no genetic future. They have no reproduction. They have no children. They have no reason to work toward long-term survival because there's no long-term. Eventually, all the existing workers will age and die. No new ants are born to replace them. The colony becomes smaller and smaller over weeks and months. The workers lose cohesion and purpose. Without a queen's pheromone signature to organize them, to tell them what to do, they become listless and disoriented. Even workers grouped together without a queen struggle terribly. They continue foraging maybe. They continue caring for each other perhaps. But something fundamental is missing, something essential. There's no organizing principle, no guidance, no pheromone signals from a queen creating coherence. There's no reproduction happening, no new ants being born. There's no long-term purpose or direction or goals. It's exactly like taking a cell from your body and trying to keep it alive outside the body in isolation, outside the system. You can do it, sort of. Scientists do this in laboratories all the time. They take cells, put them in petri dishes with nutrient solutions, and keep them alive in the short term. It's possible to maintain them. But those cells will never become something more than single cells in a dish. They will never build anything. They will never communicate or coordinate. They will never solve anything complex. They will never achieve any of the remarkable things that cells in your body achieve every single second. They're disconnected from the system. The system is gone. The context is gone. The cell is just a cell, isolated and purposeless. The ant is the same way. An ant alone is a failure. An ant alone is incomplete. It's broken. It's a cell without an organism, without a body to belong to. Its behavior patterns don't make sense when isolated. Its capabilities are minimal. Its instincts are weird and useless in isolation. They're instincts designed for colony living, not solitary living. Its lifespan is short and probably unhappy, confused, stressed. But that's exactly the point. That's exactly the evidence that proves the colony is the real organism. The individual ant is not a failure because it's incompetent or stupid or defective. The individual ant is a failure because it was never meant to exist alone. It was never designed to be self-sufficient. It was never equipped, evolutionarily, to survive on its own. It was designed through millions of years of evolution to be part of something larger, to be dependent, to require other ants, to be a component of a greater whole, to be one cell in a larger body. This is eusociality. This is what defines a eusocial species scientifically and biologically. It's a species that lives in groups where individuals give up reproduction to support the collective good, where some members cannot survive independently outside the colony, where the survival of the colony matters far more than the survival of any individual ant, where cooperation isn't a choice that ants consciously make. It's not an option. It's a fundamental biological fact built into their existence. It's encoded in their genes. It's hardwired. And when you accept that fact, when you really take it into yourself and let it sink in deeply, the way ants work suddenly makes complete sense. Complete, perfect, undeniable sense. They're not individuals working together. They're organs working together. They're cells in a body. And that body is the colony. That body is alive. That body is conscious in ways that are different from how you're conscious. Different from how humans experience consciousness and self-awareness, but no less real, no less genuine. The individual ant is the cell. The colony is the organism. And once you understand that distinction, once you really grasp it in your mind, once it truly clicks, you can never see an ant the same way again. Never again. Everything changes forever. So here's where we arrive. After zooming in and zooming out and asking all these difficult questions and reframing what we think we're looking at and challenging everything we assumed about ants and life and organisms, the ant colony is a single organism. Not metaphorically, not poetically or figuratively or as a thought experiment, literally, scientifically, demonstrably, provably, measurably. The colony has a body. That body is distributed across thousands of individual insects spread out through tunnels and chambers, but it's still a single body, a single unified system, a superorganism. It has a circulatory system made of pheromone trails and chemical signals moving through the tunnels and chambers of the nest. Information flows through these trails. Resources flow through these trails. The flow of pheromones is the flow of information, and information is the currency of a superorganism. It's how the organism communicates with itself. It has a nervous system made of antennae and chemical receptors, and tiny brains processing information from across the entire structure. Not a centralized brain that controls everything, a distributed network. The queen has a brain. The workers have brains. Each ant processes information and makes decisions, but those decisions are coordinated. They're aligned. They result in unified behavior at the colony level. The colony has organs, different parts with different functions and different shapes and different sizes. The queen is an organ of reproduction. She's the only one who can create new ants. She's the genetic core of the organism. Worker castes are organs of different functions and different abilities. Nurse ants care for the young and tend eggs. Forager ants collect food and scout new territories. Soldier ants defend the nest and protect resources. They're specialized for their roles, perfectly adapted. They're interdependent and interconnected. Soldiers are the immune system of the colony. They identify intruders and respond aggressively. The colony has a metabolism. It consumes resources, food and water and air, and converts them into growth and work and reproduction. Energy flows through the system. It's used and depleted and must be continuously replaced. It has a real, measurable lifespan. It's born when a queen starts laying eggs and workers begin building the nest. It grows and develops over time. It reaches maturity. Eventually, it declines as the queen ages. Eventually, it dies. A colony can live for 25 to 30 years. That's not metaphorical language. That's not poetic exaggeration or artistic expression. That's a real timeline, an actual measurable lifespan that we can measure scientifically and document. A queen can live for 30 years. Individual workers live 1 to 3 years. Males live only a few weeks. But the colony itself, the organism, outlives any individual member by cycling through generations continuously replacing workers, maintaining the queen, reproducing. Just like your body outlives individual cells. Your cells die and are replaced constantly throughout your life. You remain continuous. You're the same person from childhood to adulthood to old age, even though almost every cell in your body has been replaced multiple times. The colony works the same way. Individual ants die and are replaced. The colony continues. It persists through time. And here's something remarkable and deep. The colony remembers things. It preserves memory across generations. How does an ant colony remember anything? It doesn't have files or books or written records. It doesn't have a centralized memory storage system in a brain. But it does remember. It remembers where good food sources are located. It remembers the layout of its territory. It remembers the signature pheromones of nestmates and distinguishes them from enemies and strangers. How does it do this? Through the pheromone trails that persist, through the structure of the nest itself, which encodes information about the colony's past, through the behavior patterns that persist across generations of workers. The old workers teach the new workers through chemical signals and demonstration. Knowledge is transmitted. Through accumulated experience, encoded in the physical structure of the colony learns. This is how the colony maintains continuity. This is how it preserves knowledge and experience across the death of individuals. This is what makes it a real organism, a single continuous entity that persists across time, even as its components are replaced. Just like you. But how does the colony actually communicate with itself? How does information move through thousands of individual ants distributed across tunnels and chambers, scattered across territory that can span multiple rooms? How does one ant tell another ant what it discovered, what threat it encountered, what task needs doing right now? The answer is chemical, pure, simple, invisible chemistry. This is the superorganism's nervous system, not made of nerve fibers and electrical impulses like your brain, made of molecules, specifically pheromones. Pheromones are chemical compounds that ants release into the environment around them. These are not byproducts of metabolism. They're not accidental chemicals that leak out. They're deliberately produced and deliberately released, each one carrying specific meaning, specific information, specific instructions. Ants produce pheromones from specialized glands distributed throughout their bodies. Some ants have glands in their abdomen, near the rear of the body, where they can leave trails on the ground as they walk. Some have them in their legs, allowing them to mark whatever they touch with their feet. Some have them in their heads, in their mandibles, allowing them to release signals when they're eating or cutting or building. Different glands produce different pheromones, different chemical compounds with entirely different structures and entirely different effects on ant behavior. And each chemical compound has a specific function, a specific meaning, a specific message it carries. One pheromone says danger, alarm, attack, come here immediately and help fight. Another says food, nutrients, come this direction, Follow this trail. Another says hello. This is family. This is our colony. We belong together. Still another says dead ant. Corpse. Remove this from the nest. We need to process this. Still others signal queen presence, fertility status, nest maintenance needs, territorial bound, Aries. The library of pheromones is diverse, rich, comprehensive. The superorganism communicates entirely through chemistry. No sounds, no visual signals, no direct instructions from one ant to another, just molecules floating through the air, settling on the ground, coating the bodies of other ants. And when an ant's antennae encounter these molecules, when the sensory receptors in their antennae detect the presence of a pheromone, the ant immediately understands the message, not through conscious processing, not through thought or deliberation or decision-making, instinctively, automatically. The ant's behavior shifts instantly. The ant becomes a different ant. It changes its priorities, its goals, its actions, based entirely on which pheromone it detected. This is the nervous system of the superorganism. Chemistry, molecules, invisible and impossibly simple, and yet powerful enough to coordinate the actions of thousands of individual creatures into a unified strategy, powerful enough to move mountains of work and solve impossible problems. The pheromone system is not new to biology. Many animals use pheromones. Many insects use them. But ants have refined pheromone communication to an extraordinary level of sophistication. They use dozens of different pheromones. Some ants species use hundreds. Each one carries distinct meaning. Each one triggers specific behaviors. Each one eats specific responses. Some pheromones persist in the environment for hours. Others evaporate in minutes. Some are detected at vast distances. Others are effective only when ants are in very close proximity. The timing is different. The persistence is different. The potency is different. The range is different. Each pheromone is perfectly designed for its purpose, perfectly calibrated. The alarm pheromone, for instance, is designed to spread quickly through the colony. It needs to alert as many ants as possible in as little time as possible. A threat is present. An enemy is here. Everyone needs to know right now, so the alarm pheromone is volatile. It evaporates quickly. It diffuses through the air. It travels on the bodies of ants that pick it up and carry it deeper into the nest. It reaches every corner of the colony within minutes. Every ant that detects it responds immediately. The response is automatic, instinctive. The ant doesn't think about whether to respond. It doesn't weigh options or consider alternatives. The alarm pheromone touches the ant's antennae, and the ant becomes aggressive, defensive, ready to fight. The ant's entire physiology shifts toward combat mode. Muscles tense, mandibles open. The ant moves faster, more aggressively, more alert. This is the power of pheromone communication. Information moves through the superorganism at the speed of chemistry, at the speed of molecules diffusing through air and settling on bodies. And thousands of ants respond to that chemical message in coordinated, predictable, unified ways. But pheromones are not simply broadcast messages. They're not just general alerts that all ants respond to identically. Different ants detect the same pheromone and interpret it differently based on context, based on what else they're detecting, based on their age, based on their recent experiences, based on the combination of pheromones they're currently exposed to. An ant might encounter an alarm pheromone and decide the threat is very close, very immediate, very dangerous. Or it might encounter the same pheromone and decide the threat is distant and managed. The response depends on the concentration of the pheromone, the intensity of the signal. The more pheromone present, the more urgent the threat seems. The fewer molecules an ant detects, the less urgent the situation feels. This is how the colony grades its responses, how it escalates and de-escalates, how it adjusts the intensity of its reactions based on actual circumstances rather than simple on-off switches. An ant's antennae are not simple sensors. They're incredibly sophisticated instruments of chemical detection and analysis. Each antenna is covered with thousands of sensory receptors, maybe tens of thousands depending on the species and the ant's role in the colony. Specialized proteins designed to detect specific pheromone molecules. When a pheromone molecule lands on a receptor, it fits into the receptor the way a key fits into a lock. The fit is specific, precise. One pheromone molecule might fit perfectly into one type of receptor, but not fit at all into another. The antenna can distinguish between different pheromones with remarkable accuracy, can distinguish between high concentrations and low concentrations using the density of molecular binding to gauge intensity, can detect multiple different pheromones simultaneously, and integrate that information into a coherent, multidimensional picture of what's happening in the world around the ant. An ant can be simultaneously detecting an alarm pheromone, a food trail pheromone, and a queen presence pheromone, and its behavior will reflect all three signals weighted by their intensity and integrated by its neural processing. This is the sensory apparatus of the superorganism. These antennae, these chemical receptors, thousands of them on every ant, constantly waving through the air, constantly sampling the chemical environment, constantly gathering information about what's happening in the colony and in the territory. The information gathering is never turned off. An ant cannot choose not to sense, cannot choose not to detect pheromones. It's always sensing, always detecting, always gathering chemical information about the world. This constant sensory input shapes the ant's behavior continuously and relentlessly. The ant is always responding to chemical signals, always adjusting its behavior based on what its antennae are telling it in the present moment, always processing information, always changing priorities based on the chemical landscape it moves through. The superorganism is always conscious in this sense, always aware, always sensing, not consciously, not through deliberation or introspection, but through constant chemical awareness, constant chemical sensing, constant information processing at the collective level. This is what it means for the colony to have a nervous system, though it's a nervous system so different from your own that the word almost doesn't apply. This is how information flows through T. He's superorganism. This is how the superorganism perceives its world, through the antennae of thousands of workers, constantly waving and sensing and gathering information, through the chemical signals that pass between them, trail by trail, pheromone by pheromone, signal by signal. Through a system of communication so fundamentally simple, it's almost incomprehensible that it works, and yet so effective that it allows thousands of individual creatures to act in perfect coordination without any central authority, without any leader giving orders or making decisions, without any explicit instruction or training or education, just chemistry, just molecules in the air, just the basic fact that when an ant detects a pheromone, its behavior changes in response. Everything else, all the complexity, all the organization, all the apparent intelligence emerges from that one simple principle, repeated millions of times per day across thousands of ants. The trails that ants lay down are not simple one-way paths. They're not like highways where traffic flows in a single direction. They're dynamic, responsive, self-reinforcing systems that change based on what ants discover. When a scout ant finds food, something valuable, something the colony needs, the scout doesn't just grab it and run home. The scout's behavior changes. The scout begins laying down a pheromone trail as it walks. Tiny amounts of chemical released from glands on the ant's abdomen, molecules settling on the ground, creating a path, a map, a message saying I found something. This way leads to resources. The concentration of the trail is proportional to how valuable the food source is, how excited the ant is about the discovery, how much chemical it's releasing. When the scout reaches home, when it arrives back at the nest, it begins recruiting other ants, touching them with antennae, sharing the chemical signal of the food source, passing on the message. And when those newly recruited ants are stimulated to leave the nest, when they're motivated to go look for the food, they begin searching. And as they search, they're looking for the pheromone trail the scout laid down. As soon as an ant encounters the trail, everything changes for that ant. The ant follows it, walks down the path, moves in the direction the scout traveled. The ant's behavior becomes devoted entirely to following the trail. Nothing else matters. Just following the chemicals, just moving in the direction of the signal. When the second ant reaches the food source, it does exactly what the scout did. It carries food back toward the nest. And as it carries the food, it lays down its own pheromone trail, reinforcing the scout's original trail, adding more chemical, making the signal stronger, making the path more obvious, more attractive. When the second ant reaches the nest and shares the news with others, recruiting even more ants, those newly recruited ants follow an even stronger trail. Because now 2 ants have laid down pheromones. The signal is twice as powerful, more concentrated. More ants follow it successfully. More ants reach the food source. More ants return and reinforce the trail. It's a feedback loop, a self-reinforcing system, a spiral of increasing organization that creates itself without any management, without any planning, without any conscious decision-making. The more ants that find the food source, the stronger the trail becomes. The stronger the trail becomes, the more ants find the food source. The system amplifies itself, escalates itself, grows itself organically. And the remarkable thing is that this system is automatically responsive to reality. When ants are carrying food successfully from point A to point B, they're reinforcing the trail continuously. The trail gets stronger. More ants follow it. But if something changes, if the food source becomes depleted, if there's nothing left to carry home, what happens then? The trail weakens. Ants that reach the end of the trail find nothing. They don't reinforce it. They don't add their pheromones to it. They move on. They explore other areas. They follow other trails. The original trail evaporates gradually over time. As pheromone molecules break down chemically, as they're removed by wind or other environmental factors, the trail that was so strong an hour ago, that channeled thousands of ants toward a resource, simply disappears, ceases to exist. And the colony has already moved on, already shifted its attention to other food sources, other opportunities. The system corrects itself automatically, self-optimizes, without any decision maker saying we should stop using this trail now. The trail is a perfect example of emergent behavior. No ant planned it. No ant designed it. No ant said, let's make a trail system for the colony. Individual ants simply do what they're built to do. Find food, lay pheromones, follow pheromones. And out of these simple individual actions emerges a perfect, responsive, self-optimizing system for resource location and exploitation. The colony doesn't need to teach ants how to use trails, doesn't need to train them. The behavior is instinctive, built in. The ants are born knowing how to do this, born with nervous systems wired for this exact kind of communication. Evolution spent millions of years perfecting this system, millions of years refining what messages are sent, how they're sent, what triggers them, how other ants respond. The trail system is ancient, deeply ancient, encoded at the genetic level. And because it's encoded genetically, because it's instinctive rather than learned, it works with perfect consistency across the entire colony. Every ant lays trails the same way. Every ant follows trails the same way. Every ant responds the same way to the same chemical signals. Consistency, reliability, perfection. That's how you get thousands of creatures to coordinate without a leader. That's how you create organization from simplicity. The trails themselves become more efficient over time through the process of reinforcement. Multiple ants traveling the same path makes the trail stronger, but also makes it more direct. Ants following a worn trail move faster. They make fewer detours. They navigate more efficiently. The most used trails develop into the widest, most well-maintained paths through the colony. The less used trails gradually fade. Over time, the system self-organizes into an efficient network of highways and byways, all without any conscious planning or design. Chemistry, evolution, time. How does a colony decide which food source to exploit most heavily? How does it choose where to invest its foraging effort when multiple food sources are available? When a scout finds food option A and another scout finds food option B, how does the colony know which one is more valuable? How does it allocate workers efficiently? The answer is that the colony uses a form of democratic decision-making built directly into the pheromone system itself. It's a system so elegant, so simple, that it's almost impossible to believe it works. And yet, it works perfectly. Here's how it operates. When a scout finds a rich food source, a location with lots of food readily available, the scout lays down a strong pheromone trail. The scout is excited. The discovery is significant. The chemical signal is intense. When another scout finds a poor food source, a location with very little food, the scout lays down a weak pheromone trail. The discovery is not impressive. The resource is not worth much effort. The chemical signal is faint. The colony doesn't consciously compare these two signals, doesn't make a formal decision, doesn't hold a meeting about resource allocation, but the pheromone signals themselves do the comparison. The strong signal from the rich food source is more likely to attract foragers. It's more obvious. It's easier to detect. It's easier to follow. Ants that encounter the strong signal are more stimulated, more motivated. They follow it more reliably. They reinforce it more vigorously. The strong trail gets stronger. More ants follow it. More food is brought home. Recruitment intensifies. Other ants in the nest learn about the high-value source and begin following that trail too. The weak trail from the poor source, meanwhile, attracts fewer ants. Fewer ants reinforce it. The signal grows weaker. Fewer ants follow it. Less food is brought home from that location. No intensive recruitment happens around that source. The colony naturally shifts its workforce toward the rich source and away from the poor source, without anyone making that decision, without any directive being issued, without any management or supervision. It happens automatically, emergently. The pheromone signals themselves encode the quality of the resource. The intensity of the signal communicates the value of the discovery, and ants respond proportionally to that intensity. The more valuable the source, the more ants work it. The less valuable the source, the fewer ants bother. This is how the colony makes decisions, not through reasoning or discussion, not through voting or consensus building in any formal sense, through chemistry, through signals, through the simple principle that the strength of a signal affects how many workers respond to it, and the number of responding workers determines the allocation of effort. The colony achieves collective decision-making through individual responses to chemical stimuli. Each ant is responding locally. Each ant is making a personal decision based on what its antennae are detecting and what the surrounding environment is telling it. But those local decisions, multiplied across thousands of ants, aggregate into colony-level decisions, resource allocation decisions, strategic decisions, territorial decisions. The colony is making smart choices about where to invest its energy, about which resources matter most, about how to adapt to changing circumstances, and it's doing so through a system that requires no communication of abstract concepts, no planning, no reasoning, no meetings or oversight. Just chemistry affecting behavior, affecting outcomes. The signal strength directly correlates with response intensity, which directly correlates with resource investment. More ants go to places they're more attracted to. Fewer ants go to places they're less attracted to. It's automatic, proportional, perfect. This is how an organism without a brain can make intelligent decisions. How decisions emerge from simplicity. How complexity arises from the aggregation of simple responses. Thousands of individual ants, each responding to local chemical information, each making individual decisions, collectively accomplish what a central brain would accomplish, except they do it more efficiently. Because they're responding to real-time information, because the system automatically adjusts to changing circumstances, because it's responsive rather than rigid. A decision-making system so elegant that nature invented it hundreds of millions of years ago, and it still works better than anything humans have designed. The colony that makes decisions through pheromone signals never makes a wrong choice in the long term. It never wastes resources on bad options. It never miscalculates or misjudges or errs in allocation, because the system itself corrects automatically. And that correction happens without anyone noticing, without anyone making an adjustment. It's just how chemistry works. The problem with memory in a single organism like a human is that it's fragile. It's trapped inside a brain that can be damaged, that can be affected by age, that can degrade, that can fail. Memory in the human brain is based on chemical and electrical patterns in neurons. These patterns are persistent, but they're not indestructible. They can be disrupted, forgotten, lost. The superorganism solves this problem differently. The colony stores memory not in brains, but in the physical structure of the nest itself, in the arrangement of tunnels, in the chemical signatures that persist in the soil, in the pheromone marks left on trails that have been traveled thousands of times, in the behavior patterns that persist across generations, in the collective knowledge that's encoded into the instincts of the workers. When a colony builds a nest, when it excavates chambers and connects them with tunnels, it's not just creating shelter, it's creating a map, a three-dimensional record of decisions that have been made, territory that's been explored, resources that are known. The physical layout of the nest encodes information about how the colony solved the problem of living underground in that particular location, how it balanced ventilation against temperature regulation, how it positioned food storage chambers relative to brood chambers, how it arranged defensive structures. That knowledge doesn't reside in any individual ant, but the nest embodies it. Every tunnel is a piece of memory. Every chamber is a record of past decisions. New ants born into the colony don't need to learn where things are. They grow up inside the structure. The structure teaches them. The arrangement of the colony is the colony's memory, is the colony's experience, is the colony's wisdom accumulated over years of living in that location. The queen carries memory in her pheromones. The specific chemical signature she produces encodes genetic information, lineage information, colony identity information. All ants recognize that signature. all ants respond to it. The queen's pheromone is constant. It's the thread of continuity that runs through the generations. New workers are born. Old workers die. But the queen's pheromone remains. It's the same. It anchors the colony to its identity, tells every ant that there is a legitimate queen, tells every ant that this colony persists, that it has a future, that reproduction is happening, that the superorganism will continue beyond the current workers' lifespans. The queen's pheromone is a form of memory. It's the colony remembering itself, remembering that it exists, remembering that it has a purpose. Workers also create memories through behavior. Older workers teach younger workers through demonstration and touch and chemical communication. Foragers that have found reliable food sources lay trails that persist for months. Young foragers follow those trails and learn where food is located. They inherit the knowledge. They carry it forward. The knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation through the persistent trails, through the established routes, through the patterns that are encoded into the behavior of every worker. When a new worker reaches foraging age, when it emerges from the brood chambers into its adult role, it doesn't need to be trained where to go. It doesn't need guidance or instruction or mentorship from older workers in any formal sense. The colony's experience is written into the environment, written into the trails, written into the arrangement of the territory, written into the spatial organization of food storage relative to the queen's chambers. The worker just needs to follow the paths that exist, to reinforce the trails that are already there, to participate in the knowledge system that surrounds it, to inherit, through the structure itself, the wisdom accumulated by generations of prior workers. The colony's memory is collective because no individual ant has access to the full knowledge. But every ant has access to pieces of it. The structure of the nest tells each ant certain things about how to live in this particular space, in this particular soil type, in this particular humidity environment. The pheromone trails tell each ant where resources are located and which ones are worth pursuing. The queen's pheromone tells each ant the colony is real and has a future. The surrounding ants tell each ant what needs doing right now, what the immediate priorities are. The accumulated knowledge is stored not in neurons, but in behavior, in structure, in chemistry, in the collective actions of thousands of ants responding to information encoded in their environment. A trail that's been used for 6 months carries more memory than a trail used for 1 week. A nest chamber arrangement that's been perfected over decades carries more wisdom than one hastily constructed. The colony remembers. Without a brain, without neurons, without any central storage location, just chemistry, just structure, just the persistence of patterns across time and across generations. When a threat arrives, when a rival colony tries to invade territory, when a predator appears near the nest, the superorganism responds as a unified organism responds, with immediate action, with coordinated defense, with a response that's so rapid, so synchronized, so overwhelming that it looks like the colony is thinking, like it's making strategic decisions, like it's commanding its troops. But the reality is simpler and more remarkable. It's pure chemical response cascading through the population. When an ant encounters an invader, when it detects the wrong pheromone signature, the wrong combination of cuticular hydrocarbons covering a stranger's body, the ant immediately identifies the threat with remarkable precision. This is not us. This is an enemy. This is someone who belongs to a different colony and therefore has no right to be here. The ant doesn't deliberate, doesn't consider whether to fight or flee or seek advice. The ant becomes aggressive instantly. Mandibles open, the ant attacks, bites, and as it attacks, as it bites and sprays chemicals and engages in combat, the ant releases an alarm pheromone of its own. This is danger. This is enemy. Come help. Come now. The alarm pheromone spreads through the colony like wildfire. It travels on the bodies of attacking ants that are moving deeper into the nest. It diffuses through the air near the nest entrance where the battle is occurring. It reaches hundreds of ants in just minutes, some over significant distances, and every ant that detects it responds with remarkable uniformity. They become aggressive. They stop whatever they were doing, abandoning other tasks immediately. They move toward the threat. They attack. Soldiers, which are specialized for combat, respond most dramatically. Larger ants with bigger mandibles and more aggressive physiology, they come pouring out of the nest ready for warfare. Workers, while generally less specialized for combat, still respond. They assist in defense, they bite, they spray chemicals, they swarm the invader. The response is overwhelming and it's coordinated, but no ant is commanding it. No ant is saying attack now or move left or focus fire on that invader. The ants are responding to chemistry, to alarm pheromones, to the presence of enemies, to the behavior of nearby nestmates. The colony moves as one because every ant is responding to the same signals, because thousands of individual responses add up to unified action. The invader, no matter how numerous, no matter how well prepared, faces an enemy that has no central weakness. You can't kill the leader because there is no leader. You can't disrupt the chain of command because there is no chain. You can only fight thousands of individual ants, each responding independently, but each responding identically to the same stimuli. The colony's defense is not organized from above, it's emergent from below. It arises from the aggregation of individual aggressive responses. And because it's emergent, it's also adaptive. If the invader is very small, very weak, only a few attacking ants are needed, the minimal response. But if the invader is large, very threatening, very dangerous, the alarm signal intensifies. More ants are recruited. More ants become aggressive. The response scales to the threat. The colony doesn't consciously decide to escalate. The escalation happens automatically because more ants detect the alarm pheromone as it spreads, because more ants become aggressive as the threat persists, because the system itself responds proportionally to danger. This is how a colony defends itself without a general, without a strategy in the human sense, without anyone in charge of the defense, making tactical decisions, adjusting the response based on battlefield conditions. Just ants, just chemistry, just the fact that when an ant detects danger and other ants detect that same danger simultaneously, they coordinate perfectly because they're all responding to the same stimulus. They're not coordinating deliberately in any conscious way. They're coordinating because coordination emerges automatically from synchronized response. Because thousands of ants responding identically to identical stimuli naturally move in concert, naturally present a unified force, naturally overwhelm through sheer synchronized aggression. The superorganism's immune system is not made of specialized cells designed for defense, though soldiers are somewhat specialized and somewhat more aggressive. It's made of simple chemical signals that trigger aggressive responses throughout the population. It's made of the fact that every ant in the colony is fundamentally capable of fighting. Every ant is equipped with mandibles and venom and the capacity for aggression. The colony just normally keeps all that aggression suppressed, dormant, through the absence of threat signals. When threat signals appear, when the pheromone alarm cascades through the nest, the suppression lifts, aggression emerges, and the colony becomes a weapon, a unified, overwhelming, unstoppable weapon, designed by millions of years of evolution to respond to exactly this kind of emergency. No command structure needed, no planning needed, no coordination meetings, just chemistry. just the pattern of pheromone release and neural response that's been refined through countless generations of conflict and natural selection. Then, the superorganism's defense system works because it's built on the same principles as the rest of the colony: simplicity, distributed decision-making, chemical communication, individual responses that aggregate into collective action. The colony that cannot be commanded, that has no ruler, that makes decisions through chemistry, also cannot be defended with traditional military strategy. You cannot outthink an organism that doesn't think. You cannot disrupt a command structure that doesn't exist. You can only overwhelm it through force. And good luck with that when the entire colony is already overwhelmed with aggression and coming straight at you with no fear and no hesitation. The colony that operates without central command, that coordinates through chemistry, that moves like water finding cracks in stone, still faces a fundamental problem. The problem of specialization. If every ant can do every task, then no ant does any task particularly well. If every ant must be prepared for every possibility, then every ant is carrying the weight of every responsibility. The colony is like a single organism, and like any organism, it needs organs. It needs specialized structures designed for specific functions. It needs a way to distribute the enormous variety of work across thousands of individuals without creating confusion, without creating waste, without creating a system where everyone is doing a mediocre job at everything instead of an excellent job at something specific. The colony that survives is the colony that solves this problem through something so simple it's almost invisible. Through the simple fact that not all ants are the same. Ants differ in size. Ants differ in shape. Some ants are small and delicate, built for precision work, built for caring for tiny larvae in narrow chambers. Other ants are large and powerful, built for moving loads, built for excavating tunnels, built for combat. Some ants are medium, built for flexibility, built for doing whatever needs doing at any moment. These differences are not accidental, they are intentional, built into the colony's genetics, built through millions of years of evolution selecting for size diversity, for morphological variation, for physical specialization. This is division of labor written into the body itself. The colony understands, without understanding, that if you want sophisticated division of labor, you need bodies suited to the different roles. You cannot ask a small ant to move a large seed. You cannot ask a large ant to navigate a tiny tunnel or care for a delicate larva. You cannot ask a medium ant to become strong enough for the largest tasks or small enough for the smallest ones. So ants come in different sizes, and those sizes directly correspond to the tasks they perform. This is the colony's solution to complexity, not intelligence, not planning, not conscious decision-making, just physical form-following function through millions of years of selection pressure. The ant that is small and quick is naturally suited to certain tasks. The ant that is large and strong is naturally suited to others. Put the right-sized ant in the right-sized role and the work gets done with maximum efficiency. The colony doesn't have to train anyone, doesn't have to assign anyone, doesn't have to manage the allocation, doesn't have to convince a worker that this is the job it should be doing. The body shape of the ant determines its role almost automatically. The small ant simply cannot do the work that requires strength. The large ant simply cannot fit into the spaces that require smallness. The medium ant can do a little of everything, but not the specialized tasks that demand extreme specialization. The ant colony has solved the problem of specialization the way human bodies solve it. Different organs for different functions, different cells for different roles. But in the ant colony, the organs are separate individuals. Thousands of them, all coordinating through chemical signals, all working together without any central authority telling them what to do. The specialized structure is not imposed, it emerges naturally because the colony produces workers in different sizes, and those differently sized workers have no choice but to do the work their bodies are suited to perform. In some ant species, this specialization reaches extraordinary extremes. Leafcutter ants, for instance, have evolved 4 distinct worker castes, each physically different from the others, each suited to completely different tasks. This is extreme morphological specialization. This is the idea of division of labor taken to its logical conclusion. The smallest workers are called minims. They're so tiny that they can fit inside the mouths of the larger workers while those larger workers carry them. Imagine that. Imagine specializing so completely that some workers literally ride inside the mouths of other workers because they're too small to walk that far themselves. The minim's job is to maintain the fungus garden, the colony's agricultural system. These ants are farmers. They tend the fungal crops with delicate precision. They remove contaminated fungus. They remove fungus that has been invaded by parasites or disease. They maintain the cleanliness and health of the entire agricultural operation. They do work that requires both extreme smallness and extreme precision. The minims cannot perform the work of larger workers because they are not strong enough. Larger workers cannot perform the work of minims because they are too large, too clumsy, too powerful for delicate gardening work. The Physica L difference makes the role difference obvious and mandatory. Size dictates function. Evolution has locked function and formed together so tightly that they cannot be separated. The next size up are the small media workers. They're still small, but significantly larger than the minims. Their job is to cut leaves, to cut them into pieces, to strip them from branches, to carry them back to the nest, to bring them to the fungus garden where the minims will process them. They're built for this specific work. Their mandibles are the right size for cutting leaf material. Their bodies are the right strength for carrying loads that are meaningful, but not overwhelming. They're specialized for resource acquisition. They're specialized for the work of harvesting. The medium-sized majors are even larger and stronger than the media workers. They also cut leaves and carry materials, but they focus on the heavier work, the tougher jobs, the tasks that require more strength. They can cut tougher leaves, they can carry larger pieces, they can work on branches that the smaller workers cannot handle. They are the heavy equipment of the colony's agricultural system. And finally, there are the soldiers, the largest workers in the colony. Massive compared to the minims. Massive compared to any other worker. Built for combat. Built with mandibles so large and so powerful that they are nearly useless for cutting leaves or gardening. Mandibles that are absolutely essential for defense. The mandibles of a soldier ant are weapons. Pure weapons. Their size alone is intimidating. Their strength is overwhelming. A single soldier can hold off invaders multiple times its size because the physical advantage of the larger mandibles, the stronger muscles, the more heavily armored exoskeleton, compounds so dramatically that it becomes a nearly insurmountable disadvantage for any attacker. The soldier's body is an investment in defense, a massive commitment of resources to the single task of protecting the colony. The colony has 4 different body types, 4 different castes, each built for specific work, each one emerging from the same genetic material but developing into completely different forms based on how the colony feeds them as larvae, how the colony cares for them during development, what pheromones they encounter, what signals their developing brains are receiving. It's the same principle as a single human genome producing different cell types in a single body. Heart cells, liver cells, brain cells, all from the same genetic code. The same genes produce completely different outcomes based on environment and signals during development. The ant larvae are being shaped by the colony, shaped by what they're fed, shaped by the pheromones they encounter, shaped into the exact form the colony needs them to become. The colony is influencing development. The colony is making the decision without deciding about what form each larva will take. And because the colony produces these different forms in proportions that match the colony's actual needs, the system works perfectly. The colony doesn't produce too many soldiers when food is abundant and the threat level is low. It produces the right number. It doesn't produce too many minims when the fungus garden is small and the amount of gardening work is minimal. It produces the right number. The proportions match reality. The body types match necessity. And the result is a colonial organism that is not just coordinated, but physically optimized for every task it needs to perform. The colony is like a single body where the cells are specialized not just in function, but in actual physical form. The organization is written into the genetics. The order is built into the structure. The division of labor is not maintained through instruction. It is maintained through the simple fact that ants come in different sizes, and different sizes cannot do the same work. The queen represents the most extreme specialization of all. She is not just a different size than the workers. She is fundamentally different. She is a completely different organism. Her body is optimized for a single task. Reproduction, a single task, nothing else. She is larger than any worker. She lives vastly longer, sometimes 30 years compared to the 3 or 4 year lifespan of a worker. She has a completely different anatomy, different physiology, different metabolism, different everything. The queen is not just another ant with a different job. She is a different kind of ant, a different kind of being. Her abdomen is enormous, swollen with developing eggs. Her ovaries are fully developed and functional in a way that workers are not, in a way that workers will never be no matter how long they live. Her brain is not optimized for the kind of complex sensory processing that foragers need, not optimized for navigation or decision-making or learning. Her entire body is shaped toward one purpose: making more ants, egg production, continuous, relentless, lifelong egg production. The queen is capable of laying up to 1,000 eggs per day, 1,000 every day for decades. The queen's physiology is so specialized that she cannot survive alone. She cannot feed herself. She has no way to obtain food independently. She cannot defend herself. She is helpless if removed from the colony. She cannot even reproduce without workers caring for her and her eggs, feeding her regurgitated food, protecting her, transporting her larvae, raising them, nurturing them. The queen is utterly dependent on the colony, and the colony is utterly dependent on her. This is not a flaw in the system. This is not a weakness that evolution has left unrepaired. This is the system. This is the solution. The queen has become so specialized for reproduction that she has become functionally part of the colony's body rather than an independent organism. She is the colony's reproductive system. Just as your body has a reproductive system that is specialized for making new humans, the ant colony has a reproductive system that is specialized for making new ants. The queen is that system. She is an organ, a living organ, a specialized structure that produces offspring and nothing else. And because she is utterly dependent on the colony to survive, because she cannot exist outside the context of thousands of workers caring for her, the incentives of the queen and the colony align perfectly. There is no conflict. There is no power struggle. The queen cannot reproduce without the workers. The colony cannot reproduce without the queen. The queen has no choice but to devote all her energy to reproduction, because that is all her body is capable of doing. She cannot do anything else, even if she wanted to. And the workers have evolved to care for the queen, to protect her, to feed her, to nurture her eggs, because the queen is their only path to the future, their only way of creating new workers for the colony. Without the queen, the colony dies in a decade or less as old workers die, and no new ones are born to replace them. The queen's reproductive monopoly is not maintained through force or dominance in any traditional sense. It is not maintained through threat or coercion or hierarchical control. It is maintained through biology, through specialization so extreme that it becomes mutual dependency. The queen cannot command because she is incapable of it. She cannot enforce her will because she has no will to enforce. She simply produces eggs and pheromones. The workers do not follow orders because there are no orders to follow. They simply behave in ways that ensure the queen is cared for and her eggs are protected because their own genetics makes them incapable of reproducing independently. In most ant species, the workers themselves cannot lay eggs even if they wanted to. Their reproductive systems are non-functional, vestigial, evolutionary pathways that never developed. These pathways were selected against. Colonies that produced workers capable of laying their own eggs did not survive long because those workers would compete with the queen, would stop doing colony work, would start trying to ensure their own genetic lineage. Evolutionary pressure eliminated this possibility. The queen lays all the eggs. The workers simply cannot. This is eusociality in its most extreme form. The voluntary surrender of reproductive capability in exchange for the security of a stable colony. The sacrifice of personal reproduction for the reproduction of relatives. Because the workers are genetically related to the queen and to each other, supporting the queen's reproduction is not fundamentally different from reproducing themselves. The genes they carry are propagated either way. The colony survives. The genetic lineage continues. The workers have not given up anything precious. They have simply found a different pathway for their genes to move into the future. A pathway that produces vastly more descendants than individual reproduction ever could. A single queen can produce more offspring in a year than a solitary female insect could produce in a lifetime. The system is efficient beyond individual reproduction. The colony outlives any individual worker by orders of magnitude. The genetic success of the colony far exceeds what individual reproduction could achieve. The workers, meanwhile, are to the ant colony what somatic cells are to your body. They are the body. They do not reproduce. They do not pass on genes. They perform the work of living. They maintain the structure. They defend against threats. They gather resources. They care for the young. They are the vast majority of the colony, thousands and thousands of them, each one performing work that serves the collective. Each one working toward goals that are not their own. The workers will never lay eggs, will never pass on their genes, will never create offspring. But they will work their entire lives to ensure that the colony's genes are passed on successfully. They will work to raise the queen's offspring, to feed them, to protect them, to ensure they survive and flourish, and eventually leave the colony to start new colonies of their own. This is what it means to be a somatic cell in a multicellular organism. You do not reproduce. You perform work. You serve the structure. You live and age and eventually die, and you are replaced by new cells produced by specialized reproductive organs. The ant workers are like the neurons in your brain, like the cells in your muscles, like the cells in your skin. They are not making copies of themselves. They are making copies of the organism that contains them. They are working toward the perpetuation of the colony, not toward their own perpetuation. This is eusociality. This is the fundamental agreement that allows the superorganism to exist. The workers give up personal reproduction. In exchange, they gain the security and power of collective action. A single ant cannot build a city. A single ant cannot defend against invasions. A single ant cannot create the pheromone-based communication network that allows thousands to coordinate perfectly. A single ant cannot do any of this, but thousands of workers together can do everything, can solve every problem, can overcome every obstacle, can build structures that outlast any individual ant, can create a collective that persists for decades. The workers accept the trade. They cannot lay eggs, even if they want to, because evolution has designed them to lack that capability. And because they lack the capability and the desire, the colony becomes stronger than any individual could ever be. The colony becomes an organism, a superorganism, made of thousands of somatic cells that have surrendered individuality in exchange for participation in something vastly larger and vastly more powerful than themselves. The workers are the colony. They are not individuals working for the colony. They are the colony's expression of itself. The colony's hands and legs and sensory organs. The colony's way of moving through the world and doing work and surviving and growing. Without workers, there is no colony. Without the queen, there is no future. But the workers are the present moment. The workers are the living colony. The somatic cells that make eusociality possible. The colony also understands, through the blind wisdom of evolution, that not all workers are the same throughout their lives. The ant that exists is not a fixed thing. The ant changes. The ant ages. The ant's role shifts as it grows older. The ant's behavior changes as it matures. This is the principle of age polyethism, temporal polyethism. Tasks change as the ant matures. This is one of the most elegant solutions to labor allocation ever evolved. The young worker emerges from its pupal case still soft, still small, still vulnerable. The exoskeleton has not yet hardened. The muscles have not yet developed full strength. The ant has just undergone the transformation from larva to pupa to adult, and it is not yet ready for the demands of the outside world. Its first task is not to go outside and explore. Its first task is not to forage or fight or scout. Its first task is to stay inside and care for the younger larvae, to feed them, to groom them, to transport them between chambers, to maintain the brood chambers, to respond to the needs of the youngest members of the colony. The young worker is suited for this because it is small, because it has not yet developed the stronger exoskeleton, because it does not have the sensory apparatus optimized for long-distance navigation, because its entire physiology is focused on precision work, on close detail, on the needs of the colony's youngest members. The young worker is gentle by necessity. Its physical form demands it. A young ant that tried to forage would be inefficient, would be vulnerable to predators, would waste the colony's investment in its development. So the young ant does what it is naturally suited for. It cares for the brood. As the worker ages, as its exoskeleton hardens and thickens, as its muscles develop strength, as it matures physically, its role begins to shift. The worker is no longer as suited for the delicate work of brood care. Its body is getting stronger. Its strength is becoming an advantage rather than a liability. So the worker moves from brood care to nest maintenance. The worker begins to excavate tunnels, to repair chambers, to move materials inside the nest, to manage the internal infrastructure, to strengthen walls, to expand chambers, to build new structures where the CE Olani needs them. The worker is still protected from the outside world by the walls of the nest itself, but it is no longer focused exclusively on the nursery. It is focused on the structure that will protect all the ants inside it. It is doing work that requires strength and durability, work that benefits from a tougher body. The middle-aged worker, as it continues to mature, begins to move outward. The worker ventures near the nest entrance. The worker begins to scout, to explore, to check the temperature and humidity of the tunnels, to remove corpses and waste materials that have accumulated, to handle the transition zone between inside the nest and outside the world. The worker is transitioning from internal operations to peripheral awareness, It is becoming adapted for the challenges of the edge spaces. It is beginning to understand the external environment without yet fully committing to it. And finally, the old worker, the worker that has lived most of its potential lifespan, ventures fully outside. The worker becomes a forager, a scout, a defender if necessary. The oldest workers take the riskiest jobs, the jobs that are most likely to result in injury or death, the jobs that put the ant in direct contact with predators, with disease, with hunger, with temperature extremes. Foraging exposes the ant to spiders and beetles and birds that hunt insects. Scouting sends the ant into unknown territory where anything could be waiting. Defense puts the ant into direct combat against invaders many times its size. The colony has not consciously decided to sacrifice its oldest members on the most dangerous tasks. There is no decision made. There is no command issued. Evolution has simply shaped this system so that by the time an ant is old enough to be fully strong enough to forage effectively, it is also old enough that losing it is not a significant loss to the colony's long-term future. A young ant that dies represents wasted investment, wasted growth, wasted development, wasted resources spent raising that ant through its early life stages. An old ant that dies represents normal attrition. The old ant has already served its purpose in the internal tasks. The old ant has already done the work that only young ants can do. Now the old ant serves in the external tasks. And when it dies, which it inevitably will be replaced by the younger cohort that is now moving into those roles. This is not cruelty. This is not sacrifice. This is efficiency. This is the colony using every stage of the ant's life for the tasks that stage is best suited for. The age structure of the colony is a conveyor belt. Young ants enter at the internal end, small and soft and newly emerged. They progress outward and onward as they age. Middle-aged ants work on maintenance and construction. Old ants work on foraging and defense. Old ants exit from the external end when they die or are killed. And the belt keeps moving. Fresh ants constantly emerging at the beginning, dead ants constantly leaving at the end. The tasks shift to match the changing physiology and capabilities of the aging workers. No ant has to be trained to do this. No ant has to be told to change tasks as it ages. No supervisor stands around directing workers to new positions. The body changes. The capabilities change. The strength increases and then decreases. The sensory apparatus develops and then begins to degrade. The colony's needs shift across different types of work, and the ant, responding to the pheromones in its environment, responding to its own internal changes, responding to the colony's current state and current needs, naturally begins to do different work. The ant transitions smoothly from one role to the next without ever being told. The age-based progression is inevitable, built into the biology of aging itself. The same process that hardens the ant's exoskeleton and strengthens the ant's muscles also shifts the ant's behavior toward the tasks that older ants must perform. The system is beautiful in its simplicity. One mechanism, age, controls both physical capability and task assignment. The ant does not choose. The ant does not resist. The ant simply becomes older, and as it becomes older, it becomes suited for different work, and it does that work, automatically. But the system is not rigid. The colony is not locked into a fixed assignment of tasks based on age alone. The colony is not inflexible. The colony is not unable to adapt. The colony is not trapped by its own structure. The colony is responsive, adaptive, fluid. When circumstances change, when the colony's needs shift dramatically, when the normal progression is no longer optimal, when the environment demands something different, the colony can reallocate its workers in real time. The system has built-in flexibility, built-in responsiveness. If a colony loses many foragers to a predator attack, if an ant-eating bird descends on the foraging trails and kills dozens of foragers in a single day, the colony can accelerate the transition of middle-aged workers into foraging roles. Workers that would normally still be doing maintenance work can be pulled into recruitment pheromone networks and begin foraging immediately. The colony can shift its workforce in response to sudden losses. If a colony suddenly discovers a massive food source, a fruit fallen from a tree containing more nutrients than the colony could normally access in a week, the colony can pull workers out of normal internal tasks and deploy them to harvesting. Workers that were building tunnels can be redirected toward resource gathering. The colony can concentrate its effort where opportunity exists. The colony can surge its workforce towards solutions in real time. The workers do not resist. They do not require special instruction. They do not need to be convinced or motivated beyond their normal instinctive responses. The shifting needs of the colony are reflected in the shifting concentrations of pheromones in the environment. The alarm pheromone of the attack, lingering in the air, lingering on the bodies of workers that encountered the threat, signals danger and triggers as defensive behaviors. Workers that detect this pheromone become aggressive, become vigilant, become ready to defend. The recruitment pheromone from successful foragers who have found abundant food signals opportunity and triggers foraging behaviors. Workers that detect this pheromone become motivated to leave the nest, become stimulated to search, become activated to seek the resources that other workers have already found. The workers respond proportionally to the intensity of these signals. The more intense the recruitment pheromone, the more foragers are attracted. The more intense the alarm pheromone, the more workers become aggressive and defensive. No worker is forced. No worker is commanded. No supervisor is telling anyone where to go or what to do. But all workers adjust their behavior in response to the colony's current state. All workers shift their priorities based on the chemical signals they are detecting. This is how the colony survives in a changing world, not through rigid structure but through fluid adaptation underneath that structure, not through command but through chemical signaling and individual response. The colony maintains its core organizational structure, the age-based progression of tasks, the natural maturation of workers through different roles. But the colony superimposes a layer of flexibility on top of that structure, an additional dimension of responsiveness. The flexibility is real. The responses are immediate. When the colony needs workers to shift tasks, the workers shift. There is no resistance. There is no delay. When the colony needs workers to stop a task and do something else instead, the workers stop and switch. The chemical signals make the colony's needs clear, and the workers' instinctive responses make the adaptation happen automatically. The result is a system that can maintain structure while adapting rapidly. A system that is both reliable and flexible, predictable and responsive, organized and adaptive. A system that works because it does not try to be more complicated than it needs to be. The complexity emerges naturally from simple mechanisms operating in response to chemical signals. The workers age and progress through roles naturally. The colony's normal state is this age-based progression, but the colony redirects that progression when circumstances demand it. When crisis comes, the normal rules bend. When opportunity comes, the normal rules bend. When anything significant changes, the pheromone system communicates that change and workers respond to it. The balance between structure and flexibility is maintained through the same mechanism that maintains everything else: chemistry, signals, individual response aggregating into collective behavior. The colony is rigid in its structure but fluid in its response. It is predictable in normal times but adaptive in extraordinary times. It is organized and yet responsive, controlled and yet flexible. This is what allows the ant colony to survive not just in stable environments, but in changing environments, in unpredictable environments, in hostile environments where threats appear without warning and opportunities arise unexpectedly, in the real world where nothing stays the same. The colony that has fixed structure but flexible response will outcompete the colony that has either rigid structure with no flexibility or unorganized chaos with no structure. The colony needs both order and adaptability. It needs both the reliable structure that prevents chaos and the responsive flexibility that allows survival when circumstances shift. The superorganism finds the balance, the perfect balance between order and adaptation, and it maintains that balance not through conscious choice, but through millions of years of evolutionary refinement, through the accumulated wisdom of countless colonies that tried different approaches, and only the ones that found this balance survived long enough to pass their solutions to the next generation. But the colony does not maintain this balance forever. The colony is not static. The colony grows. The colony transforms. The colony moves through distinct life stages, each one presenting new problems, each one demanding new solutions, each one pushing the colony toward greater complexity. The colony begins small, impossibly small. The queen that escapes from her natal nest carries with her no workers, no food, no support structure. She is alone. She is vulnerable. Everything she has built her entire body around, the ability to lay thousands of eggs, is now potentially useless because there are no workers to care for those eggs. There are no workers to feed her. There are no workers to build the nest around her. The queen digs a chamber in the soil, seals herself inside and waits. She has stored fat in her body during her early life, reserves that her species adapted her to accumulate, reserves that she knows, without knowing, she will need. She uses these reserves to fuel her own body. She uses energy she does not have to raise the first workers. The queen does not eat. She does not forage. She cannot. She simply waits in the darkness, laying eggs, tending the eggs, and slowly starving herself while those eggs develop into pupae and then into adult workers. Days pass. The queen is alone in her chamber, sealed away from the world, vulnerable to every threat. If a predator finds her chamber, she cannot defend herself. If a parasite infects her eggs, she cannot cure them. If the soil becomes too wet or too dry, she cannot relocate. She is locked in this chamber by her own hoist by her own adaptation, trapped in a bet that her first workers will emerge before her reserves run out. This is the founding phase of the colony, the queen sustaining the entire future on nothing but her own body reserves. The process takes weeks. The queen's reserves dwindle, her body shrinks. She becomes exhausted. And then the first workers emerge. Small workers, tiny compared to what they will become as the colony ages and resources become more abundant, but functional, capable of work, capable of caring for eggs, capable of expanding the chamber, capable of bringing food to the queen. The instant these first workers emerge, the colony's trajectory changes. The queen no longer has to sustain herself, does not have to ration her remaining energy. Now the workers can feed her mouth to mouth, regurgitating food they have foraged. The queen can focus entirely on reproduction. The colony has crossed a threshold. It has moved from solo survival to collective support. The colony enters a growth phase. More workers are produced. Each new worker is slightly larger than the one before it because the colony now has more food, more resources, more capacity to invest in each individual. The colony expands its chambers, digs deeper, creates more tunnels. The colony is growing spatially as well as demographically. More chambers means room for more brood. More brood means more workers. More workers means more efficient foraging. More foraging means more food. More food means the colony can grow larger. The cycle is self-reinforcing. The colony accelerates through positive feedback. The queen is now at the center of this expanding structure. She is no longer alone in a single chamber. She is surrounded by workers, hundreds of them, then thousands. The queen's pheromones saturate the nest, regulating behavior, influencing development, maintaining the colony's cohesion. The queen's eggs are now just one of many responsibilities the workers manage. The workers groom eggs, feed larvae, construct chambers, repair damage, defend territory, forage efficiently because there are enough of them that every role can be performed by specialized individuals. The colony reaches a critical point. It reaches the point where its internal stability is no longer fragile. The colony can withstand losses now, can afford to lose some workers to predation or accident or starvation because other workers exist to replace them. The colony's birth rate now exceeds its death rate. The colony is not just surviving, it is thriving. It is accumulating more individuals than it loses. It is expanding. It is building resilience. The founding queen went into the ground alone and starving. Now, she is surrounded by thousands of workers, all of them dedicated to her survival and reproduction. The colony has grown from impossible to sustainable to strong. The colony matures. It reaches an age where it begins to think about the future beyond its own expansion. The colony becomes reproductive. The colony begins to produce new queens and males, not workers. Not just workers anymore. The colony begins to produce the caste that can leave the nest and mate and start new colonies. This is the moment when the colony shifts from growth to propagation. The colony has accumulated enough resources, enough workers, enough surplus that it can afford to devote some of that surplus to creating the individuals who will abandon the colony entirely. This is expensive. Creating a new queen requires investment. The new queen must grow larger than any worker, must develop a completely different physiology, must develop wings that workers do not have, must develop ovaries, must be nourished more richly than any worker because the colony is preparing her for a life of independence that workers will never experience. The colony creates multiple new queens, not just one. If the colony creates just one new queen and something happens to her before she mates, the colony's genetic lineage ends there. So the colony produces options. Multiple queens, each one a potential progenitor of a new colony. Multiple chances at genetic representation in the next generation. The colony also produces males. Males are even more expensive in some ways because males produce no value for the colony once they mature. Males do not forage, do not build, do not defend, do not care for brood. Males are pure cost until they leave the nest to find a mate. Their only function is reproduction. Their only value is genetic. The colony produces them because without males, the new queens cannot reproduce. The males are necessary even though they contribute nothing to the colony's present functioning. The males are an investment in the future even though that future does not include the original colony. When the new queens and males are ready, the colony waits for the right conditions. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, wind speed, soil moisture. All of these factors influence the timing. All of these variables must align. Some trigger in the environment, signals that now is the moment. the moment for the nuptial flight, the moment when reproductive individuals leave the nest, the moment when the colony's genetic future departs. It can happen on a specific day or over a period of days depending on species and region. The timing is critical. If the flight happens too early, too few reproductives from other colonies will be in the air. The queen will not find a male to mate with. If the flight happens too late, predators will have concentrated their attention elsewhere. The colony has evolved to time this event perfectly or nearly perfectly, coordinating with other colonies to synchronize their reproductive releases. When the signal comes, thousands of new queens and males emerge from the nest simultaneously. They have wings. They have never used those wings before. The wings are crumpled and wet from pupation. The reproductives pause near the nest entrance, allowing their wings to dry and straighten. Then they launch upward. They can fly. The nest opens and they pour out into the sky like smoke, like a swarm, like an explosion. This is the moment of maximum vulnerability, the moment when the colony loses its future in exchange with the possibility of creating new colonies. The nuptial flight is a feeding frenzy for predators. Birds are waiting, specialized birds that have evolved to hunt flying ants. Spiders have webs positioned in flight paths. Insects that hunt flying things congregate in areas where they sense the aerial emergence. They know, somehow they know. When reproduction happens, the predators arrive. Many of the new reproductives do not survive the flight. Many are caught and eaten before they can find a mate. Many die of exhaustion. Many are killed by weather or accident or predation before they can ever reproduce. But some survive. The ones that survive are not necessarily the ones that are fastest or strongest or most intelligent. Often they are just the lucky ones. The ones that happen to fly in a direction where predators were not waiting. The ones that happen to emerge at the exact moment when a predator was distracted. The ones that just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Some of the new queens, the ones that were lucky or fast or persistent, or just happen to be in the right place at the right time, encounter males from other colonies. The males have also emerged from other nests. The air is full of flying ants, all of them seeking mates, all of them from different colonies. When a queen and a male from different colonies encounter each other, the male grasps the queen. They mate in midair. The male does this once, then dies. His entire life, his entire body, was dedicated to this single moment of reproduction. He accomplishes it and then his biology shuts down. And he cannot survive long after mating because he served his purpose. The queen, however, survives. She flies away from the mating site, carrying sperm inside her body. Sperm she will use for the rest of her life, 30 years or more, to fertilize eggs. A single mating. A single moment in the air. 30 years of reproduction from a single encounter. The queen has accomplished what she was designed to accomplish. She has been inseminated. She has genes from a male who came from a completely different colony. She carries genetic diversity. She carries the possibility of establishing a new colony that will be different from her birth colony because it will have different genetics, different traits, different capabilities. The queen can now go anywhere. She can land and dig a chamber and seal herself inside and begin the cycle again. She can starve herself while her first eggs develop. She can wait in darkness until her first workers emerge. She can start a new colony. She can become the founding queen of a new superorganism. And if her colony survives, if it grows, if it eventually produces its own queens and males, her genetics will spread further. Her colony's genetics will propagate into the next generation and beyond. The original colony, meanwhile, has released its genetic future, has created new colonies that are genetically distinct from itself, has fulfilled its role in the larger evolutionary cycle. The original colony continues. The queen remains. The workers continue their tasks. But the colony's purpose has shifted. It has successfully reproduced. It has sent its genes outward in the form of new queens. It has diversified its genetic representation across multiple colonies, rather than concentrating it in a single nest. The colony will not last forever. The queen will age. The workers will age. Eventually, years from now, the queen will die. No new workers will be born to replace the old ones. The colony will gradually shrink. The nest will empty. The colony will end. But by that time, the colony will have already created new colonies, will have already diversified its genetic future across the population. The colony's death is not a failure. It is the completion of a cycle. The colony grows. The colony matures. The colony reproduces. The colony ages. The colony ends. But the genetics that created it continue in the new colonies it spawned. The superorganism reproduces, not through the queen alone, but through the entire system, through the workers that build and defend, through the specialized castes that exist, through the chemical signals that coordinate behavior, through the division of labor that makes complex action possible. The colony is not just an organism that reproduces. The colony is a mechanism of reproduction. The colony is reproduction on a different scale, a different level of organization. A single queen cannot create a new colony alone, but a colony can. A colony can send out new queens who will create new colonies. The colony as a superorganism has evolved the ability to create more superorganisms. The superorganism reproduces itself. But reproduction is only one challenge the superorganism faces. The superorganism must also defend itself against disease, must maintain health, must resist infection, must prevent parasites. The superorganism, like any organism, is vulnerable to pathogens. Bacteria can invade through wounds. Fungi can colonize the exoskeleton. Parasites can lay eggs inside the brood. Mites can attach to the body. Viruses can spread through the population. Any of these threats can compromise the colony's function, can reduce foraging efficiency, can kill workers, can kill the brood, can threaten the queen herself. The colony has evolved immune responses, behavioral immune responses, physiological immune responses, collective immune responses. Individual ants have immune systems in their bodies, just like you do. White blood cells that attack pathogens, antimicrobial peptides that kill bacteria, proteins that identify foreign invaders. But the colony's immune system is not just the sum of individual immune systems. The colony has an additional layer of immunity that exists at the colony level. The colony exhibits collective immunity, collective disease resistance, collective quarantine. The first line of defense is behavioral. Individual ants groom each other constantly. Ants clean their sisters' exoskeletons, remove parasites, remove debris. The grooming serves multiple purposes. It removes mites. It distributes antimicrobial secretions that some ants produce. It prevents wounds from becoming infected. Grooming is not just hygiene, it is medicine. The collective grooming of thousands of ants means that no individual has a disease-carrying mite for long. Every ant is constantly being cleaned by multiple sisters. Every ant is constantly encountering antimicrobial secretions. Every ant is surrounded by a living system of pest removal. An infected ant will be groomed more intensively than a healthy ant. Other ants detect some signal, some chemical marker of infection, and respond by grooming that ant more frequently. The infected ant becomes the focus of hygienic attention. More ants spend more time removing pathogens from its body. The colony has self-organized a system where infected individuals receive more medical attention automatically. Where the threat is highest, the response is strongest. An infected ant that would die alone survives in the colony because its sisters detect the infection and increase grooming intensity. The colony can also kill infected individuals to prevent spread. If an ant is so heavily infected that grooming cannot save it, other ants will remove that ant from the colony, will carry it outside the nest, will leave it to die away from the colony. This is not cruelty. This is containment. This is preventing a contagion that would spread to healthy ants. The colony can sacrifice one ant to save thousands. The colony can detect when an ant is too infected to save and remove that ant before it can spread disease throughout the population. The colony can also adjust its structure in response to disease. If a particular chamber or tunnel becomes contaminated with fungus or bacteria, the colony can seal that area off, can quarantine the infected region, can prevent the contamination from spreading to the rest of the nest. The colony can reduce the density of the population in areas at high risk, can reduce the density in areas where disease is already spreading, making it harder for the pathogen to jump from individual to individual. The colony can increase ventilation in affected areas, creating environmental conditions that slow pathogen reproduction. The colony is not conscious of what it is doing. The colony is not making rational medical decisions. But the collective behavior of thousands of ants responding to chemical signals of infection creates a system that functions like an immune system, functional healing, functional disease resistance, functional quarantine. The superorganism is not just vulnerable to pathogens from outside. The superorganism is vulnerable to pathogens from inside. Parasites that lay eggs in the brood, flies that infiltrate the nest and deposit larvae, mites that reproduce inside the colony. The superorganism has evolved specialized behaviors to deal with these internal parasites. Workers inspect the brood constantly. As they care for eggs and larvae, they check them. They can detect parasites. They can detect larvae that are not ant larvae. They can detect contamination. They can remove infected brood. They can kill brood that is infested. The colony sacrifices some brood to save the rest. A few larvae are lost to parasites, but the thousands of larvae that are saved represent the colony's future. The few lost are acceptable loss. The colony can also refuse to care for infected brood. If a larva is recognized as contaminated or parasitized, workers will stop feeding it, will stop grooming it, will neglect it to death. The larva dies. The infection dies with it. The colony sacrifices the individual brood to prevent the infection from reaching the adult stage, where it could reproduce, could spread to other colonies. The colony's immunity is not just about responding to threats, it is about preventing threats. Worker ants have antimicrobial secretions in their bodies. When they groom each other, they spread these secretions. The secretions kill bacteria, inhibit fungal growth, prevent infection. The colony is constantly self-medication, constantly distributing antimicrobial compounds throughout the population through grooming. The colony chooses what they eat, partly for medicinal value. Certain plants have compounds that are toxic to parasites. Certain foods increase immune function. The colony has been observed to select for these foods more heavily when parasites are present in the population. The colony learns what it needs to eat to stay healthy and seeks that food out. The superorganism is not just an organizational structure. It is a health system, a disease surveillance system, a quarantine system, a medication system. The superorganism maintains the health of all its parts as if it were a single body, because at the colony level, it is a single body. Disease in one worker is a threat to the entire colony. Infection in the brood is a threat to the colony's future. The colony responds to these threats with collective action, with collective immunity, with collective medicine. The colony does not have a doctor, does not have a hospital, does not have medicine in bottles. But the colony has something better. It has thousands of individuals working together, detecting disease, responding to disease, preventing disease, and maintaining the health of the whole through the simple actions of countless parts. The colony's evolution is not separate from the individual ant's evolution. They are the same process. Evolution by natural selection acts at both levels. Evolution selects for traits that make the colony more successful. Evolution selects for traits that make the individual more successful. Sometimes these interests align. Sometimes they conflict. When they conflict, the colony-level selection is stronger. A mutation that makes a worker more likely to work hard for the colony will spread if it increases the colony's success, even if it reduces the individual worker's personal fitness. A mutation that makes the queen more fertile will spread if it increases the colony's growth rate, even if it reduces the queen's lifespan. Evolution at the colony level can select for traits that are bad for the individual, as long as they are good for the colony. This is why eusocial insects evolved the way they did. Eusociality is not good for individual workers. Individual workers cannot reproduce. Individual workers work until they die. Individual workers never pass on their own genes. Eusociality is terrible for individual fitness, but eusociality is incredibly good for colony fitness. Eusocial colonies are more successful than colonies where every individual tries to reproduce. Eusocial colonies can grow larger, can coordinate better, can solve more complex problems, can defend themselves more effectively, can create more offspring overall. Eusocial colonies outcompete non-eusocial colonies. Natural selection acts on colonies. Colonies that are eusocial reproduce more successfully than colonies that are not. The successful colony's reproductive individuals mate and create new colonies that are also eusocial. The unsuccessful colonies do not reproduce successfully, do not create new colonies, do not pass on their genes to the next generation. Over many generations, eusocial colonies become more common. Non-eusocial colonies become rarer. Evolution by natural selection at the colony level drove the evolution of eusociality. Individual workers did not choose to sacrifice reproduction. The workers did not make a rational decision, but over evolutionary time, mutations that reduced workers' ability to reproduce spread through the population because colonies with those mutations were more successful at competing with other colonies. Colonies with sterile workers that devoted all their energy to helping the queen reproduce more offspring than colonies where workers competed with the queen to reproduce. The successful colony strategy spread. The unsuccessful colony strategy died out. Natural selection at the colony level created eusocial insects. But evolution does not just act on colony structure. Evolution acts on everything. Evolution acts on specialization, on communication, on immune response, on foraging behavior, on nest architecture, on everything that affects colony success. Evolution by natural selection has shaped ant colonies into the incredibly complex, organized, efficient systems they are, not through planning, not through conscious design, through millions of years of colonies competing with other colonies, and the most successful colonies reproducing more, passing on their genes more widely, creating more daughter colonies. The colonies that were better organized survived. The colonies that had better disease resistance survived. The colonies that foraged more efficiently survived. The colonies that could defend against predators survived. The colonies that built better nests survived. The colonies that had good leaders and good followers did not survive because ant colonies do not have leaders. and evolution selected against leaders. Evolution selected for colonies that were leaderless because leaderless colonies could self-organize without any central point of failure. Evolution selected for the exact traits that characterize modern ant colonies: decentralized decision-making, pheromone communication, age-based task allocation, morphological specialization, collective immunity, flexible response. All of these traits exist because they make colonies more successful at competing with other colonies. Evolution by natural selection at the colony level has created the superorganism. The workers in the colony share genes with each other and with the queen. The queen is their mother. The other workers are their sisters. The brothers in the colony are sons of the queen. In most ant species, the brood that develops into workers is the result of the queen mating with a male. The male and female contribute genes. The resulting daughters are sisters to each other. The daughters share genes not just with each other, but with the queen and with their brothers. The workers are not just helping a stranger reproduce, they are helping their mother and their sisters and their brothers reproduce. When a worker helps the queen lay more eggs, the worker is helping the queen have more offspring. These offspring are the worker's siblings. The worker's genes are present in those siblings, even if the worker did not give birth to them. The worker has an interest in the siblings' survival, even if the siblings are not genetic copies of the worker. The worker is promoting the spread of its own genes by promoting the queen's reproduction. This is the key to understanding why eusociality evolved. Eusociality makes sense from a genetic perspective when the individuals in the colony are closely related. The worker is not making a sacrifice by helping the queen. The worker is promoting the survival of copies of its own genes. The genes the worker shares with the queen and with its siblings are more important than the genes the worker does not have. The worker cannot reproduce on its own, but the worker can ensure that its siblings have as many offspring as possible. The worker can ensure that the genes it shares with its siblings are passed on as widely as possible. The worker can have more genetic representation in the next generation by helping the queen have many siblings than the worker could have by having a few offspring of its own. This is Hamilton's rule. Relatedness times benefit must be greater than cost. The workers are so closely related to the brood they are raising that even though the workers do not reproduce, they still have genetic representation in the next generation. They still have copies of their genes being passed on. They still spread their genetic lineage. The relatedness of sisters to each other is extremely high in ant colonies. The relatedness of daughters to their mother is 50%. The relatedness of sisters to their brothers is 50%. The workers are so related to each other that they are more likely to succeed genetically by helping each other raise shared siblings than by trying to reproduce individually. Evolution selected for this. The workers, with genes that made them more likely to help the queen, had more genetic representation in the future. The workers with genes that made them less likely to help the queen had less genetic representation in the future. The genes that promote helping the queen spread through the population. The genes that promote personal reproduction were selected against. Evolution at the level of individual genes created eusociality because eusociality maximizes genetic representation. Life is not trying to create individuals. Life is trying to create more copies of genes. Individuals are just the containers that genes use to make more copies of themselves. The individual is temporary. The genes are what persist. The genes are what matter evolutionarily. The gene is the ultimate unit of selection. The colony is a gene preservation machine. The colony exists to ensure that the queen's genes are copied as many times as possible. The workers are gene preservation machines. The workers exist to ensure that the copies of genes they share with the queen and with each other are propagated as widely as possible. The workers are not serving the queen. The workers are serving the genes they share with the queen. The workers are not sacrificing for the collective. The workers are maximizing their genetic representation through the collective. This is not conscious. This is not planned. This is not some sort of altruistic agreement the ants made with each other. This is just the inevitable outcome of natural selection acting on genes. The genes that produce workers that help the queen spread more widely than genes that produce workers do not help the queen. The genes that produce workers that groom their sisters spread more widely than genes that produce workers that do not groom their sisters. The genes that produce workers that feed the queen spread more widely than genes that produce workers that do not feed the queen. Over evolutionary time, the genes that promote cooperation accumulate. The genes that promote conflict disappear. The genes that promote selfishness disappear. The result is a colony where all workers work together toward the common purpose of propagating shared genes. The result is a perfect system of cooperation, maintained not by rules or laws or agreements, but by the most fundamental force in biology. Evolution. The colony is not conscious, but the colony is acting in accordance with the imperatives of genetic evolution. The colony is maximizing genetic representation. The colony is ensuring the survival and reproduction of genetic lineages. The colony is doing what every organism does, what every gene does, what every life form does at the most fundamental level. The colony is trying to make more copies of itself. The colony is trying to propagate. The colony is trying to continue its genetic existence into the future. The superorganism is not unique in this regard. Every organism is trying to do the same thing. Every life form on Earth, every animal, every plant, every microorganism, all of them are trying to propagate. All of them are trying to continue their genetic existence into the future. The difference is that the superorganism does it more effectively. The superorganism has created a system so efficient, so coordinated, so optimized for genetic propagation that it makes individual reproduction look primitive. A solitary insect might produce a few dozen offspring in its lifetime. A solitary female might have 3 or 4 generations. A queen ant in a colony produces millions of offspring in her lifetime. A queen produces offspring that she could never produce alone because the workers help her. The colony increases the queen's reproductive success by orders of magnitude, hundreds of thousands of times more offspring. The colony is not altruistic. The workers are not being nice to the queen. The workers are not making sacrifices. The workers are being efficient. The workers are being mathematically optimal in terms of genetic representation. The workers are promoting the genes they share with the queen more effectively by helping the queen reproduce than by reproducing themselves. The numbers make it obvious. The math makes it clear. The colony is a system that has evolved to be the most efficient possible mechanism for propagating genes. The superorganism is the ultimate expression of genetic evolution, life using every possible strategy to ensure its own continuance, life adapting to every possible environment and challenge, life creating structures and systems and organizations that maximize its chances of surviving into the future. The superorganism is life's answer to the question of how to coordinate many individuals toward common goals. The answer is chemistry, signals, response, evolution. The answer is a system so elegant that it appears alive even though it is made of organisms that are not individually intelligent. The answer is emergence. The answer is complexity created from simplicity. The answer is the superorganism. The answer is us.